Hi, and welcome along to episode 7 of the Informing Choices mini-pod. So the COVID-19 pandemic has shown us a broadening perspective on health, wellness and well-being. The usual levels of stress and anxiety have been exacerbated as we collectively try to deal with the health, economic and social fallout from the pandemic. So is workplace well-being enough of a priority in our increasingly uncertain and complex world? To talk about this theme and the wider implications of the future of well-being, I'm delighted to welcome Executive Health and Wellness Coach Tayyaba Jordan to the podcast. Tayyaba, welcome to the podcast. Tell us a little bit about what you do and why.
Oh, hi, Steve. Thank you so much. This is such a great topic. And as you mentioned, executive or corporate health and wellness coach is where I sit. And I help corporates to really find their individual path of health and wellness for longevity, resilience, but also for performance, working with leaders and their teams to try and find a solution that's going to really work for them. And I think it is a really important topic at the moment, and you've touched on it in sort of in a triplicate way, social, emotional, and also financial. So so I'm really curious to get stuck into some of your questions.
So as sometimes happens with these things, we don't quite get a chance to run through all of the questions, but let's start with something that we were kind of touching on just before we came into the podcast. So how has health and wellness, in terms of the programs that people want, the requirements for them, do you think changed over the course of the pandemic?
Well, I mean, in so many ways, I think there's been phases of the pandemic that have influenced the way that I've been coaching, for sure. I think there's sort of two types of companies that I've coached over this time. The ones that I was coaching before the pandemic hit, so they already had a foundation of health and wellness coaching. And for them, there was a very sort of organic shift from sort of general evergreen ways of helping them. So looking after their diet, helping them with performance issues, helping them with movement, and obviously mental health, to focusing a lot more on helping them get through their day mentally when working from home. So initially it was about working from home. And then after that, it started to be around resilience and helping people to get through the longevity of that. That was one side. And I think that was fairly straightforward for the companies that I'd worked with before. Then there came in this kind of new clients that basically hadn't had any foundational help with their health and wellness, and that was almost looking at kind of a mental health crisis. We had people starting with kind of anxiety, concerns about their mental health whilst working from home, the kind of hecticness of living in a home environment, and also having to perform, all the way through to real depression and feeling kind of out of sorts. So that's when I felt that there was a hell of a lot more needed than just me in this kind of environment.
Do you feel it was kind of the pace and scale of the change that really triggered a lot of that? Because it's a long time since we've seen anything like this as disruptive as this. So is that pace and scale, was that a crucial element, do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, initially everybody was just panicked, and there was a sense of kind of like, oh my God, what are we going to do? That was quickly followed by a very human reaction of camaraderie and a sense of community that came into place. And then that was followed by a kind of what happens next and a bit of a panic again. And then we came out of lockdown and back into lockdown, and that was then that then we saw a big dip in mental health. Yes, it's huge. It's nothing like we've seen before. People were completely at a loss as to what to do. The disruption of very, very normal things, getting to work, leaving the house, going shopping, and just interacting with other human beings was just pulled from underneath people's feet. And so they were very lost in this kind of new world of restriction. It could only possibly be likened to some of the feelings of World War One, when we were going, when we were sort of covering and hiding ourselves, evacuating, and feeling like we are having to protect ourselves from the world around us.
So I think you've really kind of laid out the case for programs almost in what you've described there. I just want to kind of bring that together with how we think technology might evolve in our workplaces, in our homes. So what role do you imagine programs like yours will continue to play as we work through to an increasingly technology-focused world?
I think we would be foolish to think that technology was not going to be part of our wellness programs. And I think in a world that is increasingly technological, we have to think about combining the two. I don't think we can replace person to person. There is definitely things that I saw when I was coaching, which was kind of reading between the lines. Oh, sorry, the lines of what they were saying and understanding the nuances of their issues.
Yeah.
I don't think technology has, I mean, even with kind of the intuitiveness of some technology, I don't think we've quite got there yet. So it is a combination, I think, of finding something that is, you know, an app or an online platform, and still having that person to person. I mean, I've just about to launch actually my online platform, which is exactly that, isn't it? It's a combination of having that one-to-one questions with the ability to have a deeper session, but also I think a big part of what I am doing and what I think everyone should be doing is collaborating with people like doctors, nutritionists, functional medicine doctors, psychiatrists, psychologists. So those are the people that I have on my team that will give access to, in a very convenient way, to those, you know, time poor individuals who are sitting in their office and need that extra support, but don't necessarily have the time or the inclination sometimes to reach out to exactly the specialist support that they need.
Is your sense that, you know, paradoxically, the more automated we become, the more important personal contact is going to be in the context of well-being?
I think to be understood, to be heard, and has been two of the most important things in everyone that I've coached through this time. And it's so apparent to me that you can never replace that with technology and automation. I mean, I know that there's a lot of things happening in AI, and there's, you know, there's possibly a really good version of those things happening, but I still don't think you can replace the feeling of being heard and understood, which person to person brings in that technological world.
I mean, my sense with some of those technologies like artificial intelligence you just mentioned is that they may really help us in the kind of diagnosis type phase, but actually in the treatment resolution type phase, then that's where the human contact feels to me to be absolutely crucial.
It is, because, you know, I don't think people know exactly what they're after or exactly what the issue is. So you can say a lot of things. And I think it is about having the experience and the expertise to read between the lines. I mean, I had a great example the other day of a client that I'm working with who basically has been suffering with anxiety, coming from a trauma, you know, from such a long time ago. And it was almost like investigative coaching that helped her to identify the root of that. There's no way, I don't think, that you know, any kind of intelligent technology could have traveled down that path to get
Yeah.
to that solution. And for her, it was such a massive breakthrough that was going to help her to now start working on the anxiety, but not to be a part of her life that was sort of in the way of her progress, and for her to be, you know, to get what she wants really out of life.
So it strikes me that one of the things that we kind of touched on several times through this conversation is kind of change. So what I'm wondering is how does health and wellness, do you think, factor into change leadership, especially given that humans' natural resistance to change and the wide acceptance of the exponential change we're undergoing is just, you know, it's just exploding. It's just almost bearing down on us. So, you know, so how does what you do play into that whole change leadership thing?
I mean, it's really hard, isn't it? I think the leaders that will be successful through this period of time are going to have a bit of agility and acceptance, or it's the ones that have the vision to see what's going on as a result of the help from any kind of health professionals across the board, that will see the biggest success. You know, leaders have to be willing to look at well-being first, as opposed to looking at it as a kind of you know, looking at the crisis of having a whole workforce that is struggling with mental health issues. I think I've seen it in an example myself through working with a company that very responsibly had me come in to work with their very time poor team, very high, fast-paced, tenacious individuals. And the leaders themselves never ever got involved in any of the wellness coaching or the wellness support. They just saw it as a way of kind of, you know, helping their team. And over time, over this period of time, when I've seen most of the company, they started to see a massive increase in productivity over the period of COVID. So their performance, productivity went up during COVID. And they've started to attribute that to the support, the extra support that I was giving them through that time. They then turned around and started to question, what is this? Why is this working? How is it working? So it did have to prove itself before it became something that they wanted to look at or even accept. But I think it is about agility and acceptance. And that didn't really answer your question, did it, Steve?
Well, I think it did. It does in a way, because what I think we're talking about here is maybe a shift in emphasis on leadership. So whereas leadership has perhaps in the past been focused on getting things done, it's increasingly about being empathetic, focusing on relationship, being more collaborative with people in your teams. So it's as we often talk about with increasing use of technology, it's the personal human skills that become increasingly important. And it feels that that's where what you were saying there fits in.
Yeah, it does. And I think we have to remember at this time, everybody was on the same page. You know, leaders were also at home with their children and their wives, or at home, you know, we were all taken to zero. So they all had the same issues that everybody else had. And, you know, I think that was really helpful in humanizing the needs, you know, human needs became very, very front and center, their teams and theirs. So I think that sort of helped.
Do you think that one of the things that has been accelerated through the pandemic, the realization of the importance of humanizing the way that we work, for example, and that actually that could be a positive legacy from something that's been sort of a global disaster?
So what do you mean by humanizing the way that we work? Can you just clarify?
Well, I think one of the things that we've started to do is try to understand the challenges, the underlying reasons for anxiety when we put people into difficult situations. So working from home, having to think about how we deal with not being able to see loved ones, you know, and so on. There's more acceptance, I think, from individuals through to companies at the government level, that humanizing the way that our society works has been a critical component of helping everyone through the pandemic.
Yeah, and I think it boils down to something very simple, and that is that for years until now, we have not seen any kind of amalgamation of personal and professional purpose. So having a good sense of purpose in your profession is something that's expected. You know, you have to understand why you're working to be successful. You know, you've got a really strong sense of purpose in your career. And I think what's always been really obvious to me is that people are at home a certain way and at work a certain way, and the two senses of purpose have never really mixed. And I think this pandemic has given us an opportunity to look at that and realize that the two have to be as important as each other, you know, to have a strong sense of personal purpose, to be there for your family, to be a dad, or to be a mum, or to be a working mum, you know, and to have that time with your children. So many things around that came out, you know, even with the leaders that I was working with, that there was a recognition that there was certain times in the day that worked better for family time, for self-care time, you know, 8 to 10 in the morning and 6 to 8 at night became these precious times where you could sit with your family and eat with your family, and then you could just work in between, and then go back and have dinner with your family, or run, and then perhaps go back to working again. But, you know, actually even establishing 4 hours a day, which is quite a lot of time, where you can look after yourself and connect with your family and have that quality time, and yet still work in between and possibly even after, meant that there was a better sense of purpose in both your professional and your personal life.
Fascinating. So if I was to give you the opportunity to lay out the beginnings of kind of a manifesto for the future of well-being, what do you think are the critical factors that enable a world of well-being into the future?
I think it's a big question. If I'm laying out a manifesto, I think it's about a need to have versus a nice to have. We need to make well-being something that's as important as sustainability and diversity. And I think those two things also influence and kind of mix in with that. I think it's about making it something that is so fundamental in every part of every corporate profession or any professional organization. I think it's about communication, collaboration, and commitment. I think it's those three things. If we can find successful ways to communicate health and wellness within our, certainly in our professional organizations, and understand that it's not just about getting someone in to do a talk, but it's about collaborating with the internal staff within the organization, and then also lovely if we could have a commitment from the government to make sure that there is some sort of health and wellness preventative practice there in every organization, that there is a mental health leader, that we can create mental health ambassadors within the workforce, that there's training within the workforce as well. It's all about establishing and seeing, kind of having a vision for successful change versus unsuccessful change. And I think that's going to take a lot more super duper minds than mine to come up with, to contribute to a manifesto that can really make a massive difference to our world, for sure.
I think that's a wonderful point to end on. I think that was really beautifully articulated. So, Tayyaba, how can people get hold of you if they want to know more about what you do?
Yes, absolutely, Steve. You can get hold of me through my website, which is wellnesswithme.co.uk, which is also my email, hello@wellnesswithme.co.uk. I'm on LinkedIn, if anyone dare able to spell my name or can look it up on this podcast. But yes, those are the three ways to get hold of me.
Tayyaba, that's been wonderful. Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for listening. Do tell your friends and colleagues about the Informing Choices mini pod, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Thank you.